So what is Kāyagatāsati? That's the most important thing that we have to learn actually for this workshop. So this is a jackpot question. It's not easy to understand what this is all about. As I said earlier, if you have read MN 119, Kāyagatāsati Sutta, you wonder why you go through all this trouble of looking at all this when in MN 119 everything is distant for you. You just go there and pick up everything. Say, oh, Kāyagatāsati. Now, this is not something simple. For me also, it took me many years. You only have a few minutes to do that. And I myself could not arrive at an answer. Until I read a PhD thesis written by one Taiwanese professor. Okay, before I arrive there, let me go through step by step the conclusions that I have reached from the extracts that I have given you in this section. First, I want to show you that the Kāya is not just the physical body, and as some of you have already pointed out, based on one sutta called the Kiṃsukopama Sutta, SN 35.198, on page 32 of your workbook. Let's look at the simile that was given in the sutta. The simile is that the city with 6 gates is supposed to represent the Kāya. And although it says in the beginning, Kāya is the 4 great elements made by your mother and father, subsisting on nutriment and so forth. When it talks about this city with 6 gates, this city with 6 gates has got a gatekeeper who is supposed to be wise and competent, able to distinguish friends from foes. And he also has a pair of messengers coming in, a swift pair of messengers coming from outside. Then they are allowed to go in by the gatekeeper, and they go into the city where there is a central square. And in the central square, there is this lord of the city sitting there. Because the gatekeeper allowed the messengers to go in, they are able to deliver the message of reality. So this is the simile that the Buddha gave when he explained that this has a significance. The city with 6 gates is supposed to represent Kāya. So it's not just the central square, it is the city with 6 gates. And the 6 gates, as we saw, represent the 6 internal sense bases, 5 of which are physical and 1 is non-physical. And then the wise gatekeeper who keeps out strangers and admits acquaintances is supposed to represent mindfulness, which is non-physical. The central square is supposed to represent the 4 great elements, which is of course physical. And we have the lord of the city, which is consciousness and therefore non-physical. Alright, so you see that Kāya is not just the physical body. The Kāya comprises both physical as well as non-physical elements. And we have also got 3 other elements which are not part of the city. A swift pair of messages supposed to represent samatha and vipassanā. And the message of reality, which is supposed to represent Nibbāna. And finally, the route by which they came, supposed to represent the Noble Eightfold Path. Now these 3 elements are not part of the city. They are outsiders. Alright, so from this simile, we see that Kāya need not necessarily mean the physical body. It's not just the physical body, it's more than just the physical body. It comprises both physical as well as non-physical elements. It seems to include the whole personality, the whole sentient being. Now I want to show you that Kāya is not the physical body. And this can be shown in Atthinukhopariyāya Sutta, where it becomes obvious that pleasurable feelings in the body have ceased without remainder. And yet, it is said that the yogi who is in the 3rd jhana experiences happiness with the Kāya. So obviously, Kāya here does not mean the physical body. Then in Gita-giri Sutta, MN 70, page 36, we have context with Kāya, the immaterial attainments. The immaterial attainments are the formless attainments which you can only attain after you have gone beyond form. Right? Gone beyond form means you have gone beyond physicality. You have gone beyond the five senses. That's when you attain to the immaterial attainments. So how can you contact with the physical body when you have already gone beyond it? So again, this Kāya does not refer to the physical body. And in Kāyagatāsati Sutta, not Kāyagatāsati Sutta, AN 9.43 on page 38, again, this Kāya witness or body witness are people who attain the jhanas and immaterial attainments. Now, one who has attained the jhana has not gone beyond the body, not gone beyond the physical body. In the sutta sense, in the sutta usage of jhana, the five senses are still there. When one attains the jhana, one can still be aware of what's happening in the senses and the five senses, although the mind is not affected by them. The mind is not distracted by the five senses. This is in the suttas. However, when you reach the immaterial attainments, the arupas, then you have gone beyond the five senses. So this is stated very explicitly in the suttas. When you go beyond the five senses, then what does the mind perceive? The answer is, the mind perceives the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. These are all immaterial. Nothing to do with the five senses. So even someone who has attained to these immaterial states is called Kāyagatāsati, witness, so-called body witness. But it's not the physical body, because the physical body is no longer perceptible. So definitely here, it is not the physical body, and it means the mental body. So, whether it is the jhanas or it is the immaterial attainments, the Kāya does not refer to the physical body. It is definitely not the physical body. So, piecing this evidence together, we can come to a conclusion that the Kāya here refers actually to the person who experiences what is happening, or what is called the subjective experiencer. To give you an example, when you're doing open awareness, the five senses are aware of what's happening in the senses. But the subjective experiencer is the one that is aware of seeing, of hearing, of smelling, of tasting, of feeling sensations with the body. It is the subjective experiencer that is reacting or responding to what is happening at these sense doors. And now when you talk about experiencing happiness with the Kāya, or experiencing happiness with the body, as Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it, it actually means personally experiencing happiness. You experience happiness with the Kāya means you personally experience happiness. So the word Kāya here means personally. It does not mean physically. And to contact with the Kāya means to personally experience. And finally, a Kāya witness is a personal witness, not a body witness as it has been translated. Now, to translate Kāya as body can be so misleading that it ties you down to your understanding of what Kāyagatāsati can be. Because the word body has been so strongly embedded in our consciousness to mean the physical body. So the moment you see the body, you will automatically connect it with something to do with the body, the physical body. But you must understand, as you can see in this context, that Kāya does not necessarily mean body. It could mean more than just the body. It could mean not the body. Alright? This is very much like the English word, the English compound word. Anybody, everybody, somebody. Right? When you say anybody can sit here, you're referring more to the physical body, correct? When you say anybody can have their own views and opinions, you are referring more to the metal body. Right or not? So the word body here actually means a person. Any body is any person. Somebody is some person. Everybody means every person, correct? So the word Kāya is not just the physical body, it refers to the totality of an individual. Now, let's talk about Kāyagatāsati. So, I've shown you that there's evidence to prove that Kāya is not just the physical body, and there is also evidence to show you that Kāya is not the physical body. Now, I want to show you the evidence for what Kāyagatāsati is not. Okay, now we look at the source. Here, the source is in Ekadhamma, page 28 to 29 in your workbook, AN 1.302 and 304. The evidence is that ānāpānassati and Kāyagatāsati are mentioned separately. Correct? It's number 7 and 9. Correct? Okay, 7 and 9. Now if you look at the list, you start off with recollection of the Buddha. Second, recollection of the Dhamma. Recollection of the Sangha. And so forth, right? Each of these meditations don't overlap. They are separate meditations. Correct or not? So when you look at that, then if ānāpānassati is listed separately from Kāyagatāsati, then they are not the same. They cannot be the same. They are separate meditations. And this is also found in the next sutta, the Aparachara Sangata Vago. There also the same is separately listed. So, if you look in the Kāyagatāsati Sutta, MN 119, Ānāpāna is there. And then you have also all the 14 exercises of the Kāya vipassanā, of the Satipatthana. So anything that's connected to the body, they put there. Yeah, because Ānāpāna is also connected with the body. The Buddha said in ānāpānassati Sutta that the breath is one sort of body among bodies. Alright, because of that they put it in there. And then they also put all the 4 jhanas inside there, because the jhanas were explained in terms of similes, which always talk about the body, joy pervading the body, like spring coming out from a natural water body, and so forth, so permeating through the whole body. So because the word body is there, they lump everything and put it under Kāyagatāsati. But actually, when you look at these two suttas, they are not the same. Ānāpāna is ānāpāna, Kāyagatāsati is Kāyagatāsati. But still, it doesn't tell us what it is. Right? We can know that it is not ānāpānassati. And so, that's why this sort of supports my belief that MN 119, Kāyagatāsati Sutta, is not an authentic discourse given by the Buddha. Because it conflicts with these two suttas, or these two extracts, where definitely ānāpānassati is not Kāyagatāsati, although in Kāyagatāsati Sutta, ānāpānassati is listed as number 1 among the different types of meditations classified as Kāyagatāsati. Secondly, from Ananda Sutta and Rahula Sutta, we see that asubhabhāvanā is mentioned separately from Kāyagatāsati. Same with Rahula Sutta. In Ananda Sutta and Rahula Sutta, there are 2 separate elements. He says that mindfulness gone to the body is well established, or he asks him to establish mindfulness gone to the body. Alright? And it says also to avoid the sign of beauty that is provocative of lust, and then develop asubha, develop perception in non-beauty. So these are actually different steps and separate elements. They are not the same. They are not equated. So therefore, because they are mentioned separately, asubhabhāvanā is not Kāyagatāsati. Sometimes people tend to equate Kāyagatāsati with asubhabhāvanā. And in Rahula Sutta, another important clue is that the Buddha starts off with saying that the monk is restrained according to the Patimokkha. Then he talks about restraint of the 5 senses. Normally, he would talk about restraint of the 6 senses, but here he only talked about restraint of the 5 senses. Then what happened to the 6th sense? then the sixth sense is covered by Kāyagatāsati. So that Kāya in the Kāyagatāsati refers more to the sixth, to the mind, the mental part of it. So again, in Kāyagatāsati Sutta, MN 119, among the list of meditations that are supposed to be classified as Kāyagatāsati, asubha is also there. Asubha is there in two forms. One is the 31 parts of the body, contemplating the repulsiveness or the disgusting nature or the loathsomeness of the 31 parts of the body. That's one type of asubha. And the other type is the charnel ground contemplations, contemplating on corpses at various stages of decay. That is also another form of asubha. So these are also listed as different types of Kāyagatāsati in MN 119. So this again contradicts or conflicts with what is said here, because they are two different types of meditation. Talking about the nature of Kāyagatāsati, we can go back to the simile given in the 6 animals, where the Buddha said that Kāyagatāsati is like a strong post or pillar. So what does a strong post or pillar connote to you? It means that it is something very firm, correct? Firm and steady. Then in the most beautiful girl of the land, Kāyagatāsati is like a bowl brimful of oil. So what does a bowl brimful of oil connote to you? It is something very fragile, and yet it is something very steady. Because the moment you are not steady, finish, it will spill. So it's fragile and yet it's steady. So this is the character of Kāyagatāsati. It can be steady, it can be firm, but it can also be fragile. We will see why later on. Now, I also gave one common denominator translation as subjective experiencer instead of the person. When you talk about the individual, the person, you're actually talking about a subjective experiencer. Now, this becomes very obvious in the context of sense restraint. Remember, in our second section, we came to the conclusion that a prerequisite for sense restraint is Kāyagatāsati. When you are established in Kāyagatāsati, then you will be restrained. If you are not established in Kāyagatāsati, then you will not be restrained in the senses. Correct or not? Okay, so let's look at this context. The Buddha said that having perceived anything with any of your 6 senses, then you should not grasp at the signs of features. Right? He's talking about the bhikkhu. If a bhikkhu has perceived anything with any of his 6 senses, then he does not grasp at the signs and features. So if he does so, what will happen to him? He will be invaded, flooded by evil, unwholesome states of longing and dejection, or likes and dislikes. So if you look at those words in red, that is the subjective experiencer. You see, having perceived a sight with the eyes, if the bhikkhu grasps at the signs and features, then he would be flooded by evil, unwholesome states of longing and dejection, not the eyes. Right? Not the person. Not the ears, not the nose, not the tongue, not the body, not even the mind, but the person. The person would be flooded by evil, unwholesome states of longing and dejection. So now, probably there's a question burning in your mind. So what's the difference between Kāya and mano? Because down there, having perceived something with the mind there is mano. Right? It's a sense organ, just like the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, the mano. So the difference between mano as mind and Kāya as subjective experiencer is this. Mano here is the 6th sense faculty that cognizes anything at a very rudimentary level. For example, a past event or present sense experience. For example, just now when you were practicing meditation under my guidance, I asked you to anchor your mind to the five senses, free and easy, touch and go, in order to extract your mind from compulsive thinking or obsessive thinking, daydreams and so forth. Although you try to do so, although you try to anchor your mind to the five senses, still the mind runs off. Right or not? Still memories pop up. Still you automatically identify things. Alright? So all these spontaneous things that arise in your mind, memories popping up, that is the mano. The mano will cognize that. That is the something that arises in the mano. So the mano will recognize that a memory has arisen. The mano will recognize or identify an object, even though I told you to maintain an unfocused awareness, but the mind automatically will recognize, even though you don't purposely try to do so. That is the mano's job. So what is Kāya? Kāya then is the mind that responds or reacts to what is cognized at the six senses. For example, a memory pops up. Okay? That memory that popped up is a manifestation of saññā or perception. Spontaneous memory pops up. You got no choice. You can't control it. It pops up. That is mano. The mano will then be aware that a memory has popped up. And then the Kāya is the one that will push it away. Will try to push it away if it's an unpleasant memory. And it's the Kāya that will try to follow and pursue it if it's a pleasant memory. Want to relive all the nice experiences you had. Can you see that? So there are two different parts of the mind. One is a very rudimentary cognizance of the mind that does not involve volition. And then there is the other one which is reacting, responding to what is perceived at the senses. So I said to you just now, you maintain defocused or unfocused awareness of what's happening at your senses. But as you try to practice that, suddenly you hear a sound. Immediately you recognize it's somebody coughing. You don't have to go think about it. Automatically it happens. Okay? Then you recognize it. And then a thought might rise in you, hey, I'm not supposed to recognize that. And you try to stop thinking. Alright? So that involves volition. And that is the Kāya. That is reacting to the first stimuli. The cognizance of the first stimuli is mano. The reaction to it is Kāya. Can you see? Okay, so why is this Kāyagatāsati so important in sense restraint? Because you need to be able to catch your intentions and to refrain from grasping at signs and features. Where does the intention arise? In the mind, in the Kāya. Right or not? I ask you to lock your eyeballs in a fixed direction, in a single direction. Don't move. And yet, something catches your attention at the corner of your eye, and then you turn and look. And then you realize, too late, shouldn't have turned. Because you didn't catch the intention. If you were sharp enough, if you had been watching the mind, the Kāya, the subjective experiencer, the moment intention arises, you will know there's the intention to want to be curious to see. And then you can stop that intention. Don't see. Keep your eyes in one single direction. It's because you fail to catch the intention, that's why you turn and see. Okay? This will become more obvious tomorrow, because we are going forward tomorrow to something else. And today, I ask you to lock your eyeballs in a fixed direction. Yet I see some people moving their eyeballs around. Tomorrow, you'll be asked to sit absolutely still. So cannot fidget, cannot scratch, cannot bong so, right? You have to stay absolutely still. That's the time when you learn to catch intentions. Then you can see very clearly intentions on the move, on the scratch. And then you can know how to restrain yourself from doing so. Right? So that is when you actually practice Kāyagatāsati. Yeah? You are directing your attention to the Kāya. Okay, I must express my gratitude to this person by the name of Kuan Tse-fu. He's currently the assistant professor at the College of General Studies at Yonsei University, Taiwan. This is a publication of his thesis that was submitted to the University of Oxford way back in, I think, 2010 or so, because I read this book in 2012 at the recommendation of one of my monks when I was preparing for my first Sutta study with meditation workshop on the Satipatthana Sutta. So in this book, he provided the key to understand what is Kāyagatāsati. Being a Chinese, it's easy for him to understand Kāya as self or as the person. Because in Chinese, you have this Chinese word called Pen Shen, which is oneself. Correct or not? The Shen is the body. So for him, it's easy. But for people who are not familiar with that, when you see the word body, automatically you think of the physical body. Right? And yet, I told you just now that there's these English words, anybody, somebody, everybody, yeah? I also got body, but then you know that body does not mean the physical body. It means the person. So it's the same. When you have Kāyagatāsati here, mindfulness directed to the body is just like the anybody, somebody, everybody body. It means the person. Right? Directed at the person. The person means the subjective experiencer. Okay, so we have found out what is Kāya, and we have an idea of what Kāyagatāsati is, mindfulness of the person, mindfulness of the individual, of the subjective experiencer. So what is sati? Mindfulness is a translation for sati, and the word sati is actually a noun of the verb sarati, to remember. In the whole of the Pāli language, there's only one single verb for to remember, and that is sarati. So the noun of sarati is, of course, remembrance. And what does remembrance connote to you? Remembrance means awareness of a past object. Correct or not? You remember something of the past, not the present, not the future. And yet, nowadays, mindfulness is popularly understood as present moment awareness. It's now universally understood as present moment awareness, and it has gained a lot of popularity throughout the whole world. It has pervaded through all aspects of human endeavor, not only in spiritual pursuits, but also in sports, education, politics, in the corporate world, even in the military, everywhere. And it's all based on this idea that mindfulness equals present moment awareness. The reason why it's so popular is because it works. It's effective. You know, there are some corporations who are willing to give an additional 20 minutes break to their staff after lunch break. After lunch break, you still get additional 30 minutes to meditate. You know, when you meditate for the 20 minutes, what will happen to you? You will improve your efficiency in your work. It's worth that 20 minutes. So it works. That's why it's so popular. But does that contradict the original definition of sati as awareness of a past object? How can we reconcile this apparent contradiction? So this puzzled me also for many years, just as the word Kāyagatāsati puzzled me for many years as a young monk. And I couldn't really get to the bottom of this until I read Professor Kuan Tse-fu's book. Then I got the key to understand what Kāyagatāsati is. So same for the word sati. Sati has puzzled me for a long time because the Burmese translate sati as amat yade, which means to remember. The Thais also translate it as kwam rela, which means to remember. The Sinhalese also translate it in a similar way, to remember. It's only the English who translate it as present moment awareness. And then Chinese, you write in the end with the heart, and above the heart you have present moment. Correct or not? present moment heart. So some scholars explain that to mean the heart in the present moment. I was also a bit puzzled about this, the way this is explained, so I asked one of my monk friends who knew a Chinese scholar who is an Australian, but he knows about all this ancient Chinese and the etymology of these Chinese words. And he said that the present that is on top of the heart doesn't mean that the heart is in the present moment. It means to bring a past object to the presence of the heart. Nowadays, when you use a nian jing, liam jing, to recite, actually it is to recite from memory. From memory means recall from the past into the present. So I made a lot of research about this, and finally I came to the conclusion that there are actually 4 very important aspects of mindfulness that are of great use for both worldly and spiritual pursuits. So I call this the 4 R's of sati, and one of our presenters has already talked about this. These are remember, recollect, remind, and retrospect. You will notice that all these are related to past objects. Remember here refers to remembering information while you are collecting it. For example, right now you are listening to me. While you are listening to me, you must try to memorize or remember what I tell you. Now, I see many of you writing down notes on your notebooks, on your workbooks. When you write notes, that's not mindfulness. During the Buddha's time, there was no paper for you to write. There were no recorders. Everything was through the mind. The Pāli word for to teach is vāceti, which means to cause to speak. What does that mean? Which means to say, in your days, you have to memorize what the teacher teaches you first. You memorize first and then understand later. The teacher will give you all this string of words, you memorize first. You go memorize, you come back, sit in front of the teacher, and you recite what you have remembered. After you are fluent in that, then the teacher will explain the meaning to you. That was how I learned traditional Pāli grammar. It was really difficult for me. For us, we have to understand first before we memorize, right? But in the old days, it was the opposite way. You memorize first and understand later. And you can see young Samaneras in Thailand, in Burma, they can recite the whole of the Abhidhamma by heart, but they don't know what it means. Okay, anyway, this is to remember. I'm sure that some of you also have a regular routine of chanting. You do chanting every evening or once a week or so forth. You have a chanting book, and you have been chanting for donkey years, but you never made a point to memorize. So one day you misplaced your book. No chanting tonight. Correct? Because mindfulness is something intentional. You must have intention to remember. It's not spontaneous memory, you know. This is deliberate memory. That is mindfulness. So, when students are studying for the exams, they are reading their textbooks. They cannot read the textbooks as they would read newspapers, would they? No? You read newspaper, you understand. You don't make a point to remember what you read. You just put it aside. But textbooks are different. You have to make sure that you memorize the main points so that when it comes to exam time, you will be able to recollect what you had remembered. Alright, so the next thing is to recollect. If you did not remember in the first place, can you recollect? Cannot. So, let's say I've been giving you instructions on how to meditate. You just listen. You don't make a point to memorize or to remember what I tell you. Once you get out of this hall, finish. You cannot meditate anymore because you didn't memorize my instructions. When I conduct mindful hiking retreats, when they listen to my talks or my instructions, nobody is allowed to take notes. And at the end of which, then everybody they will have a group discussion. They try to recollect what I have said, and they will do a presentation. They also need to memorize those Dhamma rhymes that I recited to you. ada, anchor, all this sort of stuff, you have to remember by heart. You just write down before. You forget where you put your phone, you forgot where you put your notebook, you can't remember how to practice. So you have to put it in your heart, not in your notebook. Okay? So, remember, and then you recollect. Then not only that, nowadays you've got Buddhist institutions where you can go and sit for a diploma in Buddhist studies, or a bachelor's, or MA, or PhD. Yeah? You have a fantastic memory. But then, if you don't remind yourself to put into practice what you have learned, will that do you any good? No. So, reminder is also sati. Remind yourself. Remind yourself means you know something from the past and you're supposed to put that past knowledge into practice, and you have to remind yourself to practice it. So that is reminder. Final one is retrospect. I'm using the word retrospect in a very literal way, not the way it is used nowadays. Nowadays, when you use the word retrospect, there's a tinge of regret involved. For example, in retrospect, I shouldn't have said that. It was a nasty thing for me to say. Why not? Nowadays, that's how it's used. But I don't use it that way. I use it in a very literal sense, because the word retrospect is made up of two Latin words, retro and spect. Retro means back, and spect means look, to look back. So you can look back at what had happened. What had happened is something of the past. But that past can be of a distant past. It could be an intermediate past, or it could be an immediate past. For example, if you recollect your past lives, that is also sati. Pubeniwa sanustati, recollecting past life. That is the distant past. When you recollect the virtues of the Buddha, you recite Arahang, Sama, Sambuddho, Itipiso, and so forth. That is also recollecting. Correct or not? That is also retrospecting. You are thinking back of the past. But the difference between retrospecting and recollecting is that in recollecting, you recollect something which you deliberately remembered. Yeah? When you retrospect, it's not necessarily so. Very good example. There is one famous meditation teacher by the name of Sayadaw U Tejaniya from Burma. He grew up in a Burmese culture, so when he was a layman, he used to go in and out of the monastery, learning and practicing meditation as a temporary monk with his teachers. When he was a temporary monk and he was on retreat, he was very serious, very intense. But when he came out, after that, went back to the world, he was just as intense, enjoying all the pleasures of the senses and all the vices of the world. So one day, he got himself so drunk, he couldn't remember what he did when he was dead drunk. Later on, when he was doing a retreat, during a meditation, then this memory popped up in him that he was drunk at that time, and he could remember every single thing that he did at that time. He was drunk, but now he could remember. Why? Because of retrospection, because his mindfulness was very powerful, and he could see what was happening then. So, he did not deliberately remember at that time, but it was saññā. Remember, I told you saññā or perception? Saññā perception has this automatic function. It will recognize something that it has already perceived before. If it is something brand new, what will it do? It will register. It is registered in the mind. And when your mindfulness is strong enough, then you can bring it back, even though you did not deliberately try to remember it at that time. And talking about immediate past, when you talk about present moment awareness, what do people mean? It means be present. Be present of your present activities, what you are doing right now. What you are doing right now can be experienced through the five senses, correct? And the five senses are always in the present, because the five senses can only take objects in the present. You can only see something right in front of you. What you saw last night, if it's not in front of you, you can't see with your eyes. Right? What you heard last night, if you don't switch on your device, you also cannot hear with your ears. So if you are trying to be aware of what's happening in the five senses, you are as present as you can get. But not actually present. You are in the immediate past. Because the eye sees first, and then mindfulness becomes aware of the seeing. Pain arises in the body first, and then only mindfulness is aware of the pain. Correct? Even more obvious, a thought arises first, and then mindfulness is aware of the thought. A reaction happens first, and then mindfulness is aware of the reaction. So mindfulness is actually looking back at the immediate past. Looking back at the past, but it could be immediate or intermediate or distant past. So it is still the job of mindfulness, is awareness of a past object, immediate past. Usually the way it is used nowadays to mean present moment awareness actually refers to this retrospective mindfulness which looks back at the immediate past. Okay? So now if we combine the two, Kāyagatāsati, Kāyagatāsati or Kāyasati, it means mindfulness or retrospective awareness of the subjective experiencer. You are looking back at the subjective experiencer to see how it is reacting or responding to what's happening at the senses. The eye sees something, but you don't guard the eye. You cannot guard the eye because the eye is a result of past karma. You only guard your reaction or respond to what you see. That's the only thing you can guard. You can't guard what you perceive through the senses. You can only guard your reaction, your response to what is perceived at the senses, including the sixth sense, the mind. Okay? So that response or that reaction is carried out by the subjective experiencer. The moment you notice that the subjective experiencer is going to grasp at the signs or the features, immediately you cut it off and move on to another object. Right? If you don't guard that Kāya, you don't guard that subjective experiencer, you wouldn't know it. You're already grasping the object, you're already making a story. Right? That's why when I gave you instructions for guided meditation, I said, ask yourself a simple question. What's the mind doing? That's Kāyagatāsati. You are looking back at what the mind is doing. Alright? Nowadays, I qualify that by saying that you ask a question, bearing in mind other anchor and free and easy touch and go. Many years ago, when I started to teach Buddhist meditation in Bandar Utama, I just said, ask yourself, what's the mind doing? So one yogi came during the afternoon, during the interview, and she told me, she was sitting there for 1 hour. She was having a lot of fantasies and video going on in the mind. And I said, what do? I just watch them. Because you asked me to see what the mind is doing, ma. So I watched the video lah. Whole 1 hour I was making a video. My own video and all this imagination and fantasies in my mind. So now I have to qualify. Not just ask the mind what's the mind doing, but remember other anchor and free and easy touch and go. Other anchor means accept, don't reject, don't follow, don't ignore, acknowledge and anchor your mind to the senses. But she wasn't doing that. She was following what the mind is doing. Okay? So in order to restrain the senses, you have to have Kāyagatāsati. You must be mindful of how the mind is reacting to what is being experienced through the senses. That's why Kāyagatāsati is a prerequisite for sense restraint. If you cannot see what's happening to your mind, how are you going to restrain the senses? A very good example is that a man who is entrusted with carrying that bowl full to the brim with oil. Right? Now, if he were to just look at the bowl all the time, if there's a pothole in front of him, he will stumble and fall and it's the end of his life. So that's why the Buddha says, he will not stray outward. Right? He will not stray outward means he's inwardly, he's watching his mind. How is his mind reacting to what's happening at the senses? The moment the mind gets curious, you must immediately curtail it. Don't follow that intention to look. Right? For example, he's carrying that bowl. And he also has an open awareness. He's aware of things, not just looking at the bowl. Because if he's just looking at the bowl, there's a pothole in front of him, he doesn't notice it, that's finished. Yeah, he's got to carry the bowl and yet also be aware of what's happening around him. Right? And then also got to look at how the mind is reacting. The mind is working so fast. You think it's all simultaneous, but it's not. It's moving so fast from one object to another. Only when you look back will you be able to restrain the senses, right? You have to catch the mind and know that it's reacting, and then you stop it from grasping at the signs and features. Then only you will be restrained. Otherwise, if you don't look at the subjective experiencer, you'll be caught in no time, you'll be dragged in, you'll be part of the story. Right? So, that's why the Buddha gave the simile. It's a strong pillar or post, or it is a bowl brimful of oil. It can be very fragile, and it can be very firm. If you can do it well enough, it's very firm. You're keeping watch on your mind all the time. And the moment it's going to go off, you catch it, and it doesn't go off. Then it becomes firm. But if you're careless, then very easily you get dragged into your story. So what I've been teaching you so far is unfocused or defocused open awareness, except for one part where I taught you point and shoot, hit and run. Yeah, that is for people who are sleepy. That is not defocused. That is focused open awareness. Focused in the sense of you focus on objects. Open in the sense of you move from one sense to another. You don't stick to one single sense. So when you go back to your daily life, you have to look at the situation. There are situations where you can practice defocused open awareness. And these are when you are in a safe, secure environment. For example, you are sitting at your balcony overlooking the forest, or you're sitting in a safe park and you open your eyes and then you have all these sounds of nature. That's the time when you can practice defocused open awareness. Another good place for you to practice defocused open awareness is when you're going to the mall. Supposing you want to shop for some item, right? Well, you just have in mind that item that you're going to buy. You go to that shop and don't look left or right. Defocused open awareness. And then you will not be distracted or lured by all these bargains by the side of you. Another place that you can practice defocused open awareness is when you are a passenger in a car. Somebody is driving and you're sitting there, and you just have to practice open awareness. Just open your awareness to all your senses and see what's going on. Especially what's going on in the mind. How is the mind reacting to what's happening? However, there are times that you need to practice focused open awareness. For example, when you're crossing a road, you can't afford to practice defocused open awareness. When you're driving a car, right? So you have to use your discretion. When it's required to be focused, then you do focused open awareness. Focused open awareness is like what this man is doing when he's carrying that bowl full to the brim with oil. Yeah? He's focused on the bowl, and yet he's also open to what's around him. Right? He cannot just trip or fall, or cannot afford to be distracted by other things. And in order not to be distracted, you have to watch internally how the mind is reacting and curtail all these intentions instead of following them. Before I end this session, I want to point out the unusual nature of mindfulness that is given in this simile in the Kiṃsukopama Sutta. The Buddha said that the mindfulness is like a wise gatekeeper who keeps out strangers and admits acquaintances. Now here it is a very unusual inclusion of wisdom in mindfulness. A wise gatekeeper is supposed to represent mindfulness, so there's wisdom involved. Usually, mindfulness and wisdom are two separate elements. They are not the same. Just like ānāpānassati and Kāyagatāsati are not the same. They are separate. Like for example, in this common phrase, sati saññā, mindfulness and clear awareness, or mindfulness and clear comprehension. Sati is mindfulness, and saññā is a part of wisdom. Then we have the 5 spiritual faculties, which are faith, effort, sati, samadhi and paññā. Again, you can see number 3 and number 5 are separate elements. Then you have the 7 factors of awakening. The first one, sati; second, Dhamma investigation; effort, rapture, tranquility, samadhi and equanimity. Again, all these, you can see number 1 and number 2 are 2 different things. Sati is mindfulness and Dhamma investigation is a form of wisdom. Then we have this lesser known 4 qualities of a wise man. Vassakāra was a Brahmin and a minister of King Ajatasattu, who was the son of King Bimbisara. One day he approached the Buddha and he made this pronouncement. He said to the Buddha that he believed that a person who possesses these 4 qualities is a wise man. And these 4 qualities are: number 1, being knowledgeable, has sati or mindfulness, the ability to remember things that were done or said long, long ago. He is skilled in his job, and 4th, he is quick-witted. So, quick-witted here is a form of wisdom, and sati is separate. So even though he was a Brahmin, he recognized the importance of mindfulness, for worldly application. So mindfulness is a very important element, not only in spiritual pursuits, in your daily life, whether you are a student or an employee, you still need mindfulness. You still need to remember, to recollect, to remind and retrospect. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the last 2 chapters of Anguttara Nikāya, Book of 1, chapters 19 and chapters 20. I've extracted out the main points from these suttas. The first one says that even as one who encompasses with his mind the great ocean, includes thereby all the streams that run into the ocean, just so whoever develops and cultivates Kāyagatāsati includes all wholesome qualities that pertain to true knowledge. So it seems that Kāyagatāsati is something very inclusive. If you practice Kāyagatāsati, which we are doing, practice opening awareness when you're looking back at how the mind is reacting to what's happening in the senses, that is Kāyagatāsati. So what is this vijjabhāgya? What are these wholesome qualities that pertain to true knowledge? You can find this out in AN 2.32. The dhammas pertaining to true knowledge, vijjabhāgya, are samatha and vipassanā. So when you practice Kāyagatāsati, you are practicing samatha and vipassanā. What we have learned today is only samatha. We have not gone on to vipassanā yet. Today, when I ask you to anchor your mind to the 5 senses, you are not doing any investigation. You are just anchoring the mind to prevent the mind from getting caught up in compulsive or obsessive thinking or daydreaming. Right? Actually, you had a taste of it today when I asked you to lock your eyeballs in one single direction. Right? When you do that, then you begin to notice how the mind is reacting. You begin to notice intentions, although you're a bit slow. You cannot catch the intentions, you follow them, and only later you realize that you shouldn't have followed the intentions. So tomorrow, as I said, we are going on to another step. Instead of just locking your eyeballs in the fixed direction, you're going to sit absolutely still, and you will learn to see even more intentions. And that's when we can start to practice vipassanā, to investigate, to see how things are connected with one another, how things arise due to cause and condition, and are subject to the 3 characteristics. In AN 6.294, the dhammas pertaining to true knowledge are given as a list of 6 types of perceptions, and these are all more vipassanā in nature. Right? Impermanent, suffering in the impermanent, not self in the suffering, detachment, abandonment, cessation. So we continue with the others. So you can see so many things that you can achieve just by practicing Kāyagatāsati. Practicing Kāyagatāsati can lead to the 4 stages of enlightenment. And to the obtaining of various types of wisdom. This is chapter 20, and in this chapter, the deathless here is a synonym for Nibbāna. It seems that in order to achieve Nibbāna, to attain Nibbāna, one has to practice Kāyagatāsati. Seems to be quite mandatory according to what is found in this chapter. Now, there's one sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, in the discourses connected with the 6 sense bases. The sutta 35.153 is called Atthinukhopariyāya Sutta in Pāli. In English, translated here as, is there a method? In this sutta, the Buddha asked the bhikkhus, monks, is there a method by means of which a bhikkhu can attain arahantship without recourse to any of these 5 grounds of acceptance? Faith, liking, hearsay, intellection, or reasoned acceptance of another's view. When we accept something, we usually do so because of one or a combination of these elements. For example, faith. Because you are a Buddhist, you have faith in the Buddhist scriptures. Right? If you are a Christian, you will have faith in the Bible. It is out of faith. There are some aspects of Buddhism which you cannot verify yourself. For example, the law of karma. How can you verify the law of karma? The Buddha said, karma means intention. There are billions and trillions of intentions that arise and pass away from moment to moment. And every intention is karma. How are you going to calculate your karmic returns or your karmic debts? Impossible. No one can do that. You can only accept out of faith. Buddhists believe in past life, in future lives, in rebirth. How do you know that you had a past life? How do you know that you had many lifetimes before? You cannot verify for yourself, for most Buddhists, and it's also a matter of faith, accepting. On a more worldly perspective, supposing you're sick, you go to see a doctor. The doctor gives you various tests, and then he prescribes some medicine for you, gives you a piece of paper, you go to the pharmacy, you get some drugs, then you take them. How do you know that this doctor is not a quack? Because you have faith in him, right? Some time ago, people say that, cholesterol is bad for your body. You should not take a lot of cholesterol. You should not take palm oil, you should not take this, take that. But nowadays they say no. Dietary cholesterol is not significant in heart disease. People used to eat 2 or 3 eggs a day. Then at one time they say cannot eat eggs. Too much cholesterol, too much fat. But now they say can, eat eggs. So who do you trust? If you like to eat eggs, you trust those people who say eggs are good for you, right? So it's out of our faith. A lot of times you read all these things from the internet, from the news. This person says this, that person says that. How do you know it's true? Huh? We don't really know whether it's true or not. And a lot of these newspapers, these media, are all bought by political parties and governments, and they control this information. And there's no way that you can really know whether it's true or not. Then you just accept out of faith. Okay, liking. Sometimes people just accept things because they like. For example, you go to listen to a Dhamma talk, and then people ask you whether you like the teachings. You say, yeah, I like the teachings. Why? Because the monk is handsome. So out of liking, you can just accept whatever you want to. Let's say people say love is blind. And it's also another aspect of liking. You just accept because of love, of liking. Another one is hearsay. We Chinese are good for that. From young, we have been practicing this filial piety, praying to our ancestors, doing Qing Bing and all that. So, when I was young, you were never allowed to question. They never tell you why you have to do this. They say, because it's our tradition, you just follow. Yeah. So, out of hearsay. You accept something because it's your tradition to do so. No questions. Intellection. This one is for intellectuals. Some people are by nature intellectual. They like to think a lot. They like to theorize a lot. For example, we have this MH370 that disappeared and nobody knew where it went to. So nobody has really come out with any solid theory. And maybe you are an intellectual, you have your own theory, and you come out with your own theory and you say, oh yeah, it must be like that. It can be no other way. Yeah, you accept it out of your own intellection. So you might have another friend who is not as great as you, who doesn't think so much, but he's also a thinker. He listens to you and says, yeah, what you say sounds very reasonable, and then he accepts your theory. So this is number 5. Reason acceptance of somebody else's view. So we accept things based on one or a combination of these things. Right? But the Buddha says, is there any way that you can attain arahantship without going through this? Now because you're all Buddhists, you accept what the Buddha says, you accept what the monk says, you accept what the scriptures say. But how do you know what the scriptures says is actually the Buddha's words? You don't know, except out of faith. But the Buddha says, can you attain arahantship without recourse to any of these things? The monk said, Bhante, you are our teacher. You tell us the answer lah. Then we will just remember it. So the Buddha said, yeah, there is a way. And what is it? It's very simple, actually. Having perceived anything with the 6 senses, he knows with right wisdom whether or not there is greed, hate, or delusion internally. So this is actually watching the subjective experiencer. You're watching how the mind is reacting to what is perceived through the 6 senses. Whether there's greed or there's no greed. Whether there's anger or no anger. Whether there's liking or there's disliking. Whatever it is, you know what's happening in the mind. But you know with right wisdom. That's the key word here. Now, a lot of people can practice Kāyagatāsati. They can look back at what's happening in their mind. Yeah? But you do so with wrong view. For example, you notice that you have a nasty comment about somebody. And then suddenly you realize, hey, I'm supposed to be a Buddhist, supposed to be a good Buddhist. How can I have such a nasty comment? And then you chide yourself for having the nasty comment. That is wrong view. Because you think that comment belongs to you. In the comment, the judgment, whatever goes on in the mind doesn't belong to you. They are products of causes and conditions. Because of past conditioning and because of the present circumstances, that's why such things arise. But you don't see that. You don't see the cause and conditioning. You don't see the not-self nature of how these arise. Because you don't see, you have wrong view. So even if you know that there's great hatred and delusion in you, when your senses come into contact with your respective object, you know. But then if you do so with wrong view, then that won't lead you to arahantship. Right? So right view is very important. With right wisdom, if you are able to practice Kāyagatāsati, introspective mindfulness, looking at how the mind is reacting to what's happening, but with right view, right wisdom. It's not mine, not me. Even if you are very intelligent, very creative, doing something that nobody else can come up with, nothing to be proud of. That is a product of cause and condition. If you are very stupid, you cannot remember instructions, nothing to be ashamed of. That's the way it is. It's due to cause and conditioning. Not me, not mine, not myself, product of cause and conditioning. And yet, you cannot just say, in that case, then anything happen lah, never mind lah. Again, there must be right view. Right view that there's no one there is cause and condition. But there's also right effort. Right effort means abandoning what is unwholesome and preventing what is unwholesome from arising. First pair. Second pair, arousing the wholesome if they have not yet arisen, and then maintaining and developing them to fulfillment once they have arisen. That is right effort. So if you notice that you have a nasty comment that arises in you, alright, and you know that, oh okay, it's not me, not mine. This nasty comment came about because of past conditioning, present circumstances. But then, because you know that it's unwholesome, you should not pursue it. You should abandon it. Right? So you must combine right view with right effort when you practice Kāyagatāsati. Because introspective mindfulness is not enough. You need to have right view. Okay? And right effort. So, what are you waiting for? Right? Start practicing Kāyagatāsati right now. Okay? Finish. Alright, any questions before I go on?